It was well past midnight when Rachel finally turned onto the empty highway. The road stretched out before her like a yawning abyss, the headlights of her car slicing through the suffocating darkness. She rolled down her window, letting the crisp night air wash over her face to keep her awake. The coffee she had downed earlier had long since lost its effect. The highway was unnervingly deserted. No tail lights in the distance, no headlights behind her, just her, the road, and the hum of the engine. Rachel turned up the radio, but all she got was static. Frustrated, she shut it off, the silence of the night now deafening. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, a habit more than anything. But this time, her stomach twisted. For a split second, she thought she saw something. A dark shape, sitting in the middle of the back seat. Rachel froze, her knuckles whitening as she tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She glanced again. Nothing. Just the empty seat and a pile of her bags. She exhaled a nervous laugh. "Get a grip," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. The stress from work, the late hour, it was all getting to her. Miles rolled by, the road snaking through dense woods that seemed to close in on her like the jaws of some unseen predator. Her mind drifted, trying to keep awake, but her eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. Then she saw it again. This time, the figure was clearer. A silhouette, slumped forward as if leaning in. Rachel's breath hitched. She whipped her head around, her heart hammering in her chest. Nothing. The back seat was empty. Her breathing grew shallow. "It's just my imagination," she whispered, her voice trembling. But doubt gnawed at her mind. Her foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, the car surging forward as if she could outrun the fear coiled in her gut. A loud thump shattered the tense quiet, and Rachel screamed. Her car veered slightly as she struggled to steady the wheel. She looked around frantically, her pulse pounding in her ears. Had she hit something? She hadn't seen anything on the road. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, and her blood turned to ice. The figure was there, this time unmistakably real. A man, his face obscured by shadows, sitting upright in the back seat, staring directly at her. Rachel's scream caught in her throat as she swerved violently, pulling off onto the gravel shoulder of the road. She fumbled with her seatbelt, her fingers trembling as she threw herself out of the car. Her shoes crunched on the gravel as she backed away, her wide eyes locked on the vehicle. The headlights illuminated the interior, revealing the back seat. Empty. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "What the hell is happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Gathering her courage, she approached the car, her legs shaking with each step. She yanked open the back door, half expecting someone, or something, to lunge at her. But the seat was exactly as she had left it, her bags undisturbed. She leaned against the car, her head spinning. Maybe she was losing it. She had to get home, get some sleep. She climbed back into the driver's seat, locking the doors with trembling fingers. Rachel pulled back onto the road, her paranoia now a living thing, clawing at her sanity. Her eyes darted to the mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see the man again. But there was nothing, just her reflection and the faint glow of the taillights. Minutes passed. The tension began to ease, though her grip on the wheel remained tight. She was just about to convince herself it was all in her head when a cold, rasping voice whispered from the back seat. "You shouldn't have stopped." Rachel screamed, jerking the wheel violently. The car spun out of control, the tires screeching as it veered off the road and slammed into a tree. When she came to, the world was a blur of shattered glass and twisted metal. Pain lanced through her body, but she managed to lift her head. Her reflection stared back at her in the fractured remains of the rearview mirror. Except it wasn't her reflection. Her face was twisted into a grotesque grin, her eyes black and hollow. And then, in a voice that was both hers and not hers, the reflection whispered, "You've been such good company tonight." Rachel's scream echoed through the night, but the road remained empty. No one would ever hear her cries, and in the mangled wreck of the car, only silence remained, except for the faint, bone-chilling sound of laughter coming from the rearview mirror. The rain hammered against the windshield in relentless sheets as David squinted at the faded map on his phone. His GPS had died hours ago, leaving him hopelessly reliant on a patchy signal and the increasingly vague directions of a poorly labeled highway. The storm was unrelenting, the world outside his car a watery blur, the headlights barely cutting through the darkness. When a green road sign appeared on the shoulder, he sighed in relief. Detour, 5 miles. A smaller line of text below it read, Ashwood Lane. He turned down the narrow road, the crunch of gravel under his tires a temporary comfort. Just a shortcut, he muttered to himself, though the hairs on the back of his neck prickled at the sight of the looming forest that swallowed the road ahead. The lane twisted and turned, the trees closing in on both sides, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky like gnarled hands. David's unease grew as the road became narrower, the asphalt cracking and breaking apart into jagged patches of dirt. He glanced at the clock, 1:13 a.m., too late to turn back. The headlights illuminated a faded mailbox perched crookedly at the edge of the road. Beyond it was a driveway leading to a cluster of dilapidated houses, their silhouettes jagged and unnatural against the inky sky. He slowed the car, peering into the darkness. The houses looked abandoned, windows shattered, doors slightly ajar. A loud thump jolted him from his thoughts, and he slammed on the brakes. His heart pounded as he scanned the road. A figure, small, pale, darted across his headlights and vanished into the trees. "Jesus!" he exclaimed, gripping the wheel. Was it an animal? A child? He couldn't tell. The rain made it impossible to see clearly. Against his better judgment, David rolled the car forward and stopped by the cluster of houses. He leaned out the window, shouting over the storm. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" Silence. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene. That's when he saw it. On the farthest house, in red, dripping letters, the words "Turn back now" were scrawled across the sagging front door. His stomach tightened, and an icy dread crawled up his spine. A sudden tapping on his window made him jump so violently his elbow hit the door. He whipped his head around, but no one was there. Just the rain, sliding down the glass in thick rivulets. David threw the car into reverse, his tires spinning against the mud as he backed away. But the road seemed longer now, twisting unnaturally, the trees almost leaning inward, as if conspiring to trap him. A sharp voice crackled through his radio. "You shouldn't have come here." David's breath caught. He hadn't even turned the radio on. He twisted the dial, static hissing in response. The voice returned, louder this time. "Leave before they come for you." "Who the hell is this?" David shouted, his voice shaking. No reply, only silence, and the faintest sound of something wet dragging across the road behind him. He turned slowly, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. Something was standing there. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs grotesquely elongated, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a featureless void, blacker than the night surrounding it. David's foot slammed the accelerator, the car fishtailing as it surged forward. The figure didn't move but seemed to dissolve into the shadows, the road stretching endlessly ahead of him. The houses reappeared. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he passed the same mailbox, the same leaning structures, the same red lettering. "Turn back now." "No, no, no," David yelled. He hit the gas harder, but no matter how far he drove, the road looped him back to the same spot. The storm grew louder, the thunder deafening, the lightning flashing so brightly it seared his vision. And then the whispers started, soft at first, like the rustle of leaves. But they grew louder, more insistent. Words he couldn't understand, voices overlapping, rising to a fever pitch. He screamed, covering his ears, but the sound was coming from inside his head. His headlights flickered, the car sputtering as the engine coughed and died. The whispers stopped. David sat in the oppressive silence, the rain now eerily absent. He reached for his phone, his hands trembling, but the screen was black. Tap on the window. This time he didn't turn. A low growl vibrated through the air, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps circling the car. Something brushed against the back of the vehicle, a scraping, dragging sound that made his stomach churn. Then, from the rearview mirror, he saw them. Not one, not two, dozens of them. Pale figures, their bodies twisted and broken, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They stood motionless, surrounding the car, staring at him with silent malevolence. He couldn't breathe. His hand reached for the door lock, but it was already too late. A cold hand clamped down on his shoulder. David turned slowly, his body trembling with terror. And there, sitting in the passenger seat, was a woman. Her face a grotesque mask of decay, her mouth stretching into an unnatural smile. "We've been waiting for you." The car doors flung open, the figures closing in as David's screams pierced the night. When the sun rose the next morning, the road was empty. No car, no houses, no mailbox. Just the silent forest and the faint, ghostly sound of laughter echoing in the wind. The highway stretched endlessly before Claire, a black ribbon cutting through the shadowy wilderness. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as her headlights illuminated the barren road ahead. It was the kind of silence that crawled under your skin, broken only by the steady hum of her car's engine and the rhythmic patter of rain on the windshield. She fiddled with the radio dial, hoping for some music to fill the void. Static hissed and crackled through the speakers, broken occasionally by faint murmurs of garbled words. "Of course," she muttered. Middle of nowhere and no signal. Suddenly, the static cleared, replaced by a soft, melodic hum. A lullaby, faint and distorted as though it were being played on an old warbled record. Claire's brow furrowed. She hadn't tuned to any station, yet the song played clearly now, eerily soothing. Then, a voice. "You're going the wrong way." Claire's heart jolted, and her eyes darted to the radio. It wasn't a song, it was someone speaking. The voice was soft, almost apologetic, like someone gently correcting her. She scanned the road signs, but they were few and far between. She laughed nervously to herself. Great, now I'm imagining creepy warnings from the radio. But the voice came again, louder this time. "You're going the wrong way, Claire." She slammed on the brakes, her car screeching to a halt in the middle of the empty highway. Her chest tightened as her name echoed through the static. She hadn't imagined it. Someone, or something, had just spoken to her. The silence pressed down on her, suffocating. She glanced in her rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car or someone on the road. Nothing but rain and darkness stretched out behind her. The radio crackled to life again. This time, the voice was sharper, impatient. "Turn around. Now." Claire's pulse quickened. She checked her phone for directions, but the screen was dead. No signal, no map, nothing. A flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, and she thought she saw a figure standing far in the distance, just at the edge of the light. A chill ran down her spine. She blinked, and the figure was gone. She hesitated before slowly pressing the gas pedal, the car crawling forward. The radio was silent now, but the tension in the air felt suffocating. Each mile dragged on like an eternity, the oppressive quiet making every creak of the car sound unnaturally loud. And then, the voice returned. "You're not alone." Her blood turned to ice. The words were spoken in a whisper, almost playful, but filled with malice. She glanced into the rearview mirror, and her breath caught in her throat. A figure was sitting in the back seat. She whipped around, heart hammering, but the back seat was empty. Her eyes darted back to the mirror. The figure was still there, closer now, its face shrouded in darkness. "Who are you?" Claire shouted, her voice trembling. She hit the gas, the car surging forward as the rain fell harder, her wipers barely able to keep up. The radio began to play again. This time, a jumbled cacophony of whispers, overlapping voices that grew louder and louder. Among them, she could make out distinct phrases. "Don't look. Keep driving. It's too late." Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the steering wheel, her vision blurring with tears of fear. She could feel it now, something in the car with her. The temperature dropped, the air thick with a heavy, suffocating presence. A sudden, ear-splitting bang made her scream as the car jolted violently. She swerved, barely keeping it on the road. Her headlights illuminated a mangled, twisted figure in the middle of the highway, its head lolling unnaturally to one side. She slammed the brakes, but when she looked again, the figure was gone. The car came to a halt, the rain pounding relentlessly. The radio crackled once more, the whispers now a single, clear voice. "You should have listened." The lights flickered, and her car died, the engine sputtering out as the world plunged into darkness. Claire's chest heaved as she fumbled for her phone, praying for any sign of life. The screen lit up, but instead of her home screen, it displayed a single message. "Look in the mirror." Tears streamed down her face as she slowly raised her eyes to the rearview mirror. The figure was there, leaning forward, its face now visible. It was her own face, but twisted, decayed, the flesh peeling away to reveal bone beneath. Its hollow eyes stared into hers, and it smiled. "You were never going to make it home." The figure lunged forward, and Claire's scream was swallowed by the static of the radio, now blaring at full volume. When the police found her car the next morning, it was abandoned, the driver's seat empty. But in the back seat, they found the radio still playing, soft whispers repeating one phrase over and over. "She didn't listen."